And we are recording. Hello. Okay, so tonight we're talking about words. Tonight we're talking about body horror, and the reason why we're talking about body horror, if you watched or saw the VOD for my writing stream, you'll know that I'm writing this sci-fi horror podcast, all about what's a bean doing in there? All about it's not all about body horror, but body horror is a major, it's a major aspect of the horror that I'm writing in the immediacy. There's more to it than just body horror, but that's like the immediate threat as of where I am right now. And body horror is one of those things where I think it's like the one horror subgenre of horror where I can't bring myself to watch. I find that I am naturally repulsed by the imagery that is present in body horror. Like that scene in Alien which you might get to tonight, where the chest opens up and then snap. No, thank you. And mostly because it's like an empathetic kind of thing. It's because I immediately put myself in the shoes of the person whose body is becoming monstrous. So I'm writing this play, or this podcast. I say it's a play because it feels like a play. I'm writing this podcast, and basically the monster is a body horror causing monster. As I explained last time, my first stream 2 weeks ago, it's like basically we're in a space station a space station that's orbiting a black hole. An egg comes out of the black hole. It looks like it's made of human skin. Some dude bro from thermonuclear tries to touch it. It takes his hand. And then somebody screams, and it grabs the woman's screaming monster with his new hand. And then it grows a mouth and starts screaming by itself. And that's sort of where my first episode ends of my podcast. And so I'm thinking about, okay, what happens next? Where does this lead? This egg thing that can steal body parts and potentially rearrange other people's body parts. A, what are some things I can play with? B, what has been done already? Those are two things that are connected. And C, what am I saying with that? I think that brings us to the first sort of bit of tonight's discussion. Is this meme by my friend Brandon? Oh no, why did you close out? Huh. Oh, okay. I know why that did that. Next time. Anyways. So my friend Brandon, this was like the weekend after, it was 1 week ago. So last Monday. Monday after the election. And he posts this thing. And my friend Brandon likes to post what I call well-meaning centrist memes. He's gotten himself into trouble with his memery before, and people mistake him for sort of less well-meaning than he actually is. But I find his stuff funny. But I also know him, and I know he means well. So yeah, we got this meme. And this is Bob. He votes Republican. This is Bob's friend, Sally. She votes Democrat. Bob and Sally are still friends because Bob and Sally share one spherical hand. They are trapped together through the fusion of flesh. Every moment is hell. Bob and Sally, they yearn for the sweet release of death. Now, I woke up Monday morning of the election, or Monday morning after the election, I should say, getting ready for work. And I'm like, what's on Instagram? This is the first thing I see. Now, beyond laughing at the sort of bait and switch, which is like a commentary on these half-assed or bullshit memes of people can just get along politically and can put aside political differences, which just does not account for the fact that a lot of political views are like inherently like threatening to marginalized people. So Bob voting Republican is taking away Sally's what do you call it? Her right to her own body, which, that's a thing that's gonna, that's a thing, because what kind of body horror is a woman not, a woman being forced to gestate a living creature inside her body, is that not body horror? If it's not consensual, is that not body horror? Anyways, that's all that, and I'm surprised no one has done that. Actually, someone might have, sort of. We'll see. We'll get to that later tonight. So I see this meme in the morning at 7:30 in the morning. It's the first thing I woke up. And normal person would say, haha, that's a bait and switch comedy. They're fused together. It's taken literally. It's not a political commentary like you initially think. Great. That's good. That is tasty. What my brain does is start to think about the literal consequences of such a fusion. And because this is an example, a very mild example, but this is an example of body horror, of your body doing things it should not be doing. Why is my calculator coming up? Oh boy. Nobody wants a calculator right now. We're not doing math. This is an example of bodies betraying their owners, basically. That's sort of the essentialization of body horror, is your body doing things it should not be doing. And this does not include gore. Like if an outside cause creates the damage, or so to speak, that's not body horror, that's gore. Now where it gets a little dicey is when you get medical gore, which could be considered body horror depending on how you look at it. Specifically, like the tusks, human centipedes. It's like sort of a combination, because it is caused by an outside influence, but it's your body in medically having been induced to do things that it should not be doing, or basically, or in forms it should not be taking. Because there's a transformative element of body horror that is essential. Anyways, so Bob and Sally are fused together by one spherical hand. They are trapped together through the fusion of flesh. Every moment is hell. They yearn for the sweet release of death. So, what we have here is an example of conjoinment, which happens in real life. There are things called as conjoined twins. We'll get into more into those in a second. They have been fused together, and there are a lot of... Yeah, you're very true, Ash. It is like, pregnancy is body horror, like even with consent. It is just, I'm very glad I'm not a cis woman, and I have so much respect for that. I mean, even, we don't need to get into it, but like period alone is like body horror in and of itself. Your body's bleeding in ways, I mean, it technically should, but doesn't feel like it should be. Anyways, that's a whole nother can of worms, which we can dive into if that's where the dramaturgy leads us tonight. This is what my brain does, right? My brain thinks about the consequences and then follows those consequences and like unfurls the thread. And so what my brain did at looking at this meme at 7:30 in the morning is it unfurled the thread. Okay, their hands are fused together. Is that really, like, of all the examples of body horror that a human can endure in, like, the wide imagination of all of humanity, and, like, when you have things like Alien, you have things like The Thing, you have things like Color Out of Space, you have things like Society. Most of these movies, or half of these movies I have seen mostly, when you have literally Cronenberg's imagination, David Cronenberg, period. This particular example of body horror is not that bad. It is a simple conjoinment at the hand. But for some reason, simply being joined at the hand, which is not all dissimilar to, it's a little bit more freakish, but it's not dissimilar to just being handcuffed together by unbreakable handcuffs, that's what warrants every moment is hell. They are trapped together in a fusion of flesh. Every moment is hell. And it says to kill them because they yearn for the sweet release of death. Now, if a simple fusion at the hand, which mind, and this, again, this is where my brain went at 7:30 in the morning. If a simple fusion at the hand is enough to warrant like murder, mercy killing, how the fuck do y'all think Conjoined Twins feel? Because I don't think they feel like their life is a living, every moment is hell. They don't want to be killed. I mean, maybe some conjoined twins want to be separated. Some don't. Some can't imagine what that is, and that's sort of like the that gets to the question of the question of the main question of the stream, and others will unfurl. Is body horror ableist? So that's literally just what my brain went to. Like it, and this all happened in like the span of like a second. Because there are people. So and again, I'm not saying that this meme is problematic. It was simply like taking a very specific political meme and distorting it and flipping it on its head, which I think is funny. But like, so that I'm not saying cancel this meme, hurrah, and definitely don't cancel my friend Brandon because he's had enough of that. Thank you. But thinking like deconstructing this meme, because that's what I'm doing. If they think that a simple whoever created this thinks a simple fusion of the hand is hell, and that the person, do they think that is the case for conjoined twins? Is that what they think? So the question is, to me, is this meme, is body horror as a genre, is it ableist? Because it implies that that distortion of the human body is painful and something that you would never want, and it's something to be feared. Something for both the outsider to fear and the person experiencing it to fear. Because that's really the main point. Like it's gross to watch, but why body horror works is you imagine that happening to yourself. That's what body horror is really about. It's not the oh no, there's a monster that looks like two humans fused together or whatever. Like that's not what makes body horror scary. Body horror scary is you see that distortion happening and you imagine it happening to yourself. And that's what's scary, is your body rebelling it. Exactly. I agree. And you know what? That's why I try to talk about it, and I'm kind of clickbaiting with this title because it's not problematic. It's not ableist. And as my friend Allison, who read that post, I basically posted all these questions in a story again at 7:30 in the morning, and Well, it's so there's the thing is though, some examples, as we'll get to, some examples of what is body horror can happen to a person. The number one being, Conjoined Twins. And the reason why Conjoined Twins come up is, you'll see in a second. So it's not like, is body horror ableist? It's more of, what is that relationship? What is body horror saying about ableism? This instinct that we don't, how we feel about our bodies functioning differently than it currently does, essentially. And for the disabled, the physically disabled, their bodies don't function the way normal people do. No, I gotta check that out. I heard it's not good. The witches, is this like the witches as in the three witches and the boy who turns into a mouse, or is this something different? Because also Three Clawed Fingers is like, okay. The Three Clawed Fingers is like an age-old stereotype, like horror trope. And again, what this thing is about is, okay. What this sort of is about is like, what are the tropes of, like, what, it's not what's problematic, but like, what are the tropes of body horror? And that's what really we're going to look like. And what are they trying to say? Or where, not even what they're trying to say, because a lot of times horror isn't trying to say anything. It is just reacting to or manifesting from the subconscious of the writer who lives in the world at the time that they create their horror. So horror is often either foreshadowing of like real life events, or a reflection of, it can be a metaphor for the fears, the real life fears that people have during the time that it's written. And so when I look at this, I'm like, yep. H.P. Lovecraft. Good old racist H.P. Lovecraft. Although he was like racist for his time. Like, people met him and heard some of the things he had to say in his time of existence, and were like, "Whoa, dude!" And this is like during the 20s and the teens. They're like, "Whoa, chill." But yeah, that's sort of horror and where this meme came from. So I'm having this, like, my brain's like churning this, like, what, and thinking of what is it about body horror that scares me? Why am I interested in writing it? What am I trying to say by writing it? Yeah. Exactly. I mean, he came around later in life, but like, that was far too late. But also too, H.P. Lovecraft is an interesting example, and why horror as a genre does not fit into problematic versus unproblematic. You can't just deem like all horror is problematic, and that's the point. And it's not that it's trying to be, I mean, part of it is that it's trying to be controversial, but it's showing you something that you don't want to see, so that you can see it and experience the fear and then move on. And you've gotten over, it's a vaccine, really. It's a vaccine for real life fears. It's a vaccine for going out into the world and experiencing the world, which is fucking scary. We have a virus right now that is killing people, and people don't want to wear masks. That's terrifying. And so there's going to be so much zombie fiction. I don't want to watch the zombie fiction that's going to come out of this, but there's going to be so much fucking, I mean, look at Death Stranding as we've been playing it. Like, if that whole game is so foreshadowing of the year that has come since that game came out. Oh my god. Anyways, so yeah, so that's where we are. And so I'm thinking about this, right? I'm thinking about what is body horror, what is its relationship to ableism, because ableism is something I care about, something I want to write about, and I don't want to create horror that is. I want to be mindful to not be ableist in my horror, but I would like to attempt to confront it. And I'm thinking about where my story is going, and there's an opportunity to explore that I don't want to miss necessarily. So I'm thinking about that, having those thoughts. The very next day, y'all, Dead by Daylight announces their new killer. The next Dead by Daylight killer is the twins, and oh god, please no. So, we'll watch this trailer. We'll just watch this trailer and then we'll talk about it. Turn on my desktop audio. So, having those thoughts about body horror, and the next day, Dead by Daylight, it's like, hey, here's our new killer. Body horror. In case you haven't figured out, the new killer is a pair of Siamese twins. Or not Siamese. Ooh, and that's a bad... Rewind. That phrase is a slur. Rewind. Conjoined twins is what I meant to say. It's a pair of conjoined twins. It's not a kind of conjoined. I don't think can happen in real life, but I could be wrong. Where they're fraternal twins. They're a boy and a girl, and I guess supposedly like sometime during birth, his body got mixed in with hers, and his feet sort of grew into her chest. And there's a few things, let's just dive in to their lore, because their lore kind of sets the stage for, it sets the stage for a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight, but also, basically, their lore actually sets the stage for what we're talking about tonight. So let's talk about it. A pair of conjoined twins, Charlotte and Victor Deshay, formed an emotional bond like none other. The unlikeliness of their successful birth in the 17th century could be described as miraculous, yet it immediately brought about their life of persecution. The twins emerged with Victor's lower body affixed into the chest of his sister, legs twisted around her muscles and organs. He was smaller than Charlotte, grown as if he were an appendage of her body rather than a fully formed boy. As the newborn screeched, so did the midwife who delivered them, running from the home, yelling of a demon birthed by a witch. So began the hunting of Charlotte, Victor, and their mother Madeline. The coming years were fleeting memories for the twins, yet they were the closest thing to a normal life they would know. The journey with their mother was what they believed all children went through, the games of running and hiding through France's countryside being an ordinary occurrence. At the age of 5, a new challenge to the game was presented as their mother fell ill. Pale and exhausted, Madeline had no choice but to pass responsibility of collecting food onto Charlotte. The girl, burdened under the extra clothing that concealed Victor's protruding body, set out from their forest tent and marched to the nearby town. Though a peculiar sight, she did what she had been trained for, waited for an opening at the market, and swiping whatever food she could. It was a victory in the game, one short-lived. After midnight, glowing flames surrounded the family's encampment, bobbing through the darkness. A single commanding shout broke through the night's silence. A mob of witch hunters streamed in. Grubby hands tore the twins from their bed, Charlotte frantically kicking all who approached. Madeline cried for her children, but her voice abruptly silenced by a club to her skull. Victor shrieked, wailing like a trapped rat. The hunters coordinated quickly. A judge on hand declared Madeline guilty of witchcraft, evidenced by her demon spawn. Within minutes, they shackled her unconscious body to a tree, surrounding her feet with dry twigs and moss. As she awoke, she did not struggle, only begged her children to turn away. They would be given no choice. The twins were forced to watch as the torch was lit, and they watched as flames leapt up their mother's skirt, charring and sizzling her flesh. They watched as fat dripped from her body and her face bubbled and twisted. They watched until the screams that tore her vocal cords were no more, and all that was left was the crackling of embers and a nauseating stench. Whatever joy and goodness were in them died with their mother. Caged and transported to an old wooden temple, they were sold to a secretive group clad in dark cloaks. Victor reacted with the ferocity of a rabid beast to anybody who approached, clawing and biting. The only solace that would calm him was the embrace of his sister, bitter and hateful to all but her brother, and found purpose in being his protector. Within the temple, they were exposed to unusual experiments, some cruel, many simply baffling. One day they would be made to break the neck of a small gray bird. The next, they would bleed their finger into a vase of roses. Every 7th day they would sleep with a branch of damp oak beneath their bed. Then there was the chanting, a never-ending chorus from cloaked figures on scheduled intervals. In time, a final experiment was planned. 2 robed figures herded the twins to the center of the temple, holding Charlotte upon an altar in a room lit with candelabras. The wrinkled face of a man peered from under his hood, placing a hand on the forehead of each twin, making careful examination of their skulls. "Memento mori," he uttered as he withdrew a shining blade. Charlotte rolled to her side, shifting her brother off the altar. With a screech, he stretched his arm as far as he could, knocking the candelabra to the ground. The flames took to dry wood immediately. They swept over the floor, igniting the black robes that brushed against it. Screams of agony pierced the chaos, invigorating Charlotte. She dashed through the infernal, vision concealed with nothing but black smoke and blazing flame. A painful heaviness filled her lungs. No exit could be found, every step leading to the overwhelming heat. She felt her knees suffocating and then saw it. Sunlight, trees. She stumbled from the fire into dewy grass. Without looking back, she ran into the forest until she collapsed. When Charlotte opened her eyes, she reached for Victor's hand. He made no attempt to budge. His body hung helplessly from her torso. She clasped his face and stared into his sad, still eyes, the movements she was accustomed to, his body pulling at her skin, his legs prodding at the cavity in her chest, were no more. Victor was dead. Charlotte had no choice but to continue moving as she mourned, fearing black cloaks and witch hunters were prowling. She concealed her brother's corpse under her clothing and marched for the sewers of a nearby city. There she set up camp, often emerging often to steal whatever food she could, resorting to raiding barns for pig slop when desperation set in. Throughout the years, Victor's corpse rotted as his limbs oozed and blackened, yet his body demonstrated resistance to complete decomposition, as if his sister's blood still coursed through him. Protecting his lifeless body became Charlotte's sole reason for being, refusing to ever be separated from the one only family she had left. Life into her teenage years was a gamble for survival. Her hatred for humanity grew under the realization that they would never leave her be. No matter how many died during her botched robberies or desperate attempts to escape, there would always be more to pursue and sling words of condemnation at her. Monster, demon, witch. And it was the Black Cloaks who were the worst of them. Their hunt for her was unending, forcing her to constantly abandon shelter and run. For years Charlotte fled, drawing blood out of necessity, cradling her long-dead brother in the night. During a frigid winter her body began to break down. Food was scarce, and the refuge of rickety shacks were no use against the freezing temperatures. Sickle in hand, she sheltered near the campfire in the woods, not knowing if the Black Cloaks would take her before the cold did. As frost crystallized around her nostrils and her lips took on a gentle blue hue, Charlotte felt something she had never experienced: acceptance. She closed her eyes, opening herself to the serenity of death, when a shriek, shrill and vicious, pierced her ears. Victor's spasm flailed from her chest, a cloud of fog encompassing him. Before she could correct, he spilled from her in a bloody puddle, landing on the snow and running. Pulling herself from the edge of death, she gave chase. Calling his name, she ran through the forest until her legs could hardly carry her, until finally, within her view, was Victor, sitting at the edge of a thick fog. His face, twisted and frail, screamed as a dark-hooded figure emerged from the fog, grabbed his arm, and seized him. The serenity had crept into Charlotte was extinguished, replaced with the seething hatred and rage she had depended on for so long. With a tight grip on her sickle, she charged into the fog, prepared to eviscerate any who set foot near her brother. So, I read this on the bus the other day. I was like about to cry. Dead by Daylight, when they first started, their writing was very bland, and then like as it's progressed, like, you know, say what I can about like the business model of Dead by Daylight, it is very much largely a freemium game that you still have to pay for, and it's bugged to all hell. But the production design, the character design, and the writing, the game writing, and the narrative design is just like, I could go on about how that's a video topic I want to do, about how Dead by Daylight is the best written multiplayer game I've ever played. But neither here nor there. So first of all, I want to highlight, as the newborn screeched, so too did the midwife who delivered them. So, again, the way body horror works is, what makes it scary is you see it happen, or you witness a distorted body, a body that is not correct, or not that it's not correct, but it is different than what we've been accustomed to, and our impulse is revulsion and fear and like demonization, yelling of a demon birthed by a witch. Like this whole, like all of this is about how they're pursued by here, and there's a hint of irony. They're pursued because, 16th century, they are viewed as demonic because their bodies are not normal. And then, yet ironically, they fall victim to a cult that largely could be read as like satanic or demonic, or so. There's an irony that shows like it's truly the able-bodied in this case that are the monsters in this story, and that's the thing about Dead by Daylight, is the killers are not, and this is the thing about Dead by Daylight, and it can be extrapolated to refer to horror as a whole. In Dead by Daylight, the killers are not the villains. The killers are not the antagonist. They are monsters. They are a force of nature that motivates and pushes the protagonists forward. That is the service of a monster in horror. the idea, the way Dead by Daylight is, the lore is set up, is that a Dead by Daylight trial. So, for those who don't know, Dead by Daylight is set in, speaking of H.P. Lovecraft, there is this eldritch entity, just known as the Entity, and they swoop, and this entity feeds on human emotion, good and bad. Hello, Stephen King. And much like it wants to put, like it as in It from Stephen King, wants to put people in situations where they feel like either unending pain or unending hope. And so it takes these characters from history all around, that's why, and different versions of reality, and that's why you're able to get the likes of Pyramid Head and Freddy Krueger, and it brings them together, and it forces the killers to hunt the survivors, and it reaps off of the emotions of both of them. And that's why unfortunately, that lore explanation is used to define Dead by Daylight. It's really horrendous balance and leveling system and lack of a win condition for killer. But that's again, I can spend a lot of time talking about Dead by Daylight, but it's taken these people who it views as violent, and it takes these people who have the potential to be hopeful, and it pushes them together and says kiss, except instead of kiss, it says kill and or escape. And it just smushes them together, and time does not make sense. It is unending. It is an endless cycle, and the killers have no choice. The killers have been given one task, and some of them are preconceived to be violent, like the Freddy's Kruegers, like the Michael Myerses, like the Pyramid Head's different. Like the, I'm not going to dive into Pyramid Head's lore, especially when it comes to him being in Dead by Daylight. Anyways, like there are killers that are like, yes, or their version of Ghostface, which is, they only licensed the mask, they did not license Scream. These are people who want to be killers, and them being in the entity's realm is a sort of, it's basically heaven for them. But then there are killers like the Wraith, like the Nurse, like the Spirit, that are inadvertent killers, that they were captured. They're just as much a victim of the entity as the survivors are. They just happen to be on the other side, and it just happens to be manipulating them in different ways. And so, Violet and Charlotte, or Victor and Charlotte, I keep wanting to call her Violet. Victor and Charlotte are not antagonists. They are monsters, as in the horror term, the monster, but they are not antagonists, and they are not evil. They have been forced into their situation. They are sympathetic creatures, or not even creatures. They are sympathetic characters, and that's the thing about a lot of horror, especially Dead by Daylight's monsters. I mean, you even think back to the original of Frankenstein's monster. Frankenstein's monster is a sympathetic character. It's not you are on his side. It is the people that are the monsters. It's the same thing with this, and that aspect of it, of people with bodies that do not match what is expected of them, that do not fit the norm, are viewed as the non-horror term monstrous. And again, the definition for monster within horror is literally just the force of nature that creates the tension and causes the protagonist to conflict with the antagonist. The antagonist is not the monster. Michael Myers is not, I mean, not really, no. It's, we're not going to analyze Halloween right now, but it's slashers are different. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre, another example of like ableism and horror. And is this ableist, or is this a commentary on ableism? That's the thing. Is it ableist, or is it a commentary on ableism? Is the question, and it depends on what you're watching. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Leatherface is not the antagonist. He is the monster, but what's his name? His brother. His brother's the antagonist. His brother is the ringleader. His poor Leatherface is just doing what he is told because he does not know any better, because he does not have the intelligence to put two and two together. He just knows that his family eats people. He doesn't like realize what that means. He's just doing the normal thing, and he doesn't want to disappoint his brother. So Charlotte and Victor are not are monsters, as in the horror term, but they're not monsters. They are people who are being ostracized and demonized by the able-bodied and hunted by the able-bodied. And what does that say? That we are so afraid of this image of a body that does not match your expectations, that we are instinctually, I mean, there's, yes, maybe some evolutionary psychology element of it, but we are not instinctually afraid of those bodies. And that's where, like, that's what's interesting to me about body horror, is what makes, when I am afraid of body horror, is it because I don't want to be like that? Is it because the loss of control? Is it because I empathize with for me, I frequently empathize with the person going through it. But why do I do that? Like, in horror, yes, the person suffering from from the effects of body horror do need sympathy and empathy. In real life, they don't. In real life, like, Conjoined Twins don't want your empathy. They just want to be people. People in a wheelchair, they don't want your empathy. They just want to get from places A to B without having to feel like a burden or something like that. You know, people just want the world to be accessible to them, and it's not. Or sickness, like body horror is also associated with illness, not necessarily disability, but illness. And illness and monstrosity, and disability and monstrosity. Like, from the very beginning, that brings us to the start. There's a lot of ways you could call it this, and excuse the terminology used, but that's the name of the movie. Freaks, the 1932 pre-code horror film. For some, now this is not sci-fi, this is not effects, this is not actually, this is real disabled people who many people think, and part of it was because of the edit that was released wider, is that this movie again demonized or made monstrous the disabled. No, the disabled are the heroes of this film, and it's the able-bodied that are the villains, and it's the disabled. It's a here, yeah. So the original version. So it was cut and edited with alternate footage, which makes it look like the freaks were villainous. But in the original version, they were not the villains; they were the heroes, and it was the able bodies that were the villainous. And they were, and you could consider this body horror because it is folks who are disabled, and let's just read from Wikipedia. The film's depiction of people with disabilities has been a significant point of analysis amongst film critics and scholars. In his book, Subversive Horror Cinema, Countercultural Messages of Films from Frankenstein to the Present, critic John Towson proposes the freak exemplifies anti-eugenics sentiment. In presenting this idea, Towson cites vignette sequences that make up the beginning of the film, largely consisting of the freaks in the context of their sideshow, before Browning begins to undercut the voyeuristic aspects of the traditional freak show by showing the freaks engaged in their activities of everyday life, dispelling the initial shock and revulsion, encouraging the viewer to see the freaks as individuals who have overcome their disability. So it's almost like an anti-body horror. Because when a person to see this, especially in the 1930s, 32, we'll definitely get to this, especially back then, the freak show was a thing. Like, people went to freak shows to gawk and to laugh at or to be afraid. In a sixth sense, it was their version of a horror movie. In a sixth sense, it was their version of that, what I said earlier, of that sort of inoculation of screaming and terror to get it out of your system, so that were they to encounter a disabled person in real life, they wouldn't react as scared. Maybe that's a really wishful thinking. Well, let's continue reading. Towson also notes that the freak's everyday interactions with the able-bodied sideshow performers such as Feroso, Roscoe, and Venus further blurs the distinction between the able-bodied and disabled members of the circus, and that the physically beautiful characters, such as the trapeze artist Cleopatra, are the ones who are vindictive and immoral. He further argues that the implied sexuality of the film, such as the implication that the Conjoined Twins, played by Daisy and Violet Hilton, carry on their own separate sex lives, is an affront to the eugenic stance against reproduction and sexual activity among the physically unfit. Towson ultimately concludes that the version of the character exemplifies a stark opposition to the core belief of eugenics, which is that physical appearance is equated with internal worth. That physical appearance is equated with internal worth is So we're going to I'm just going to start copying and pasting quotes into my research doc. These are all the links that I have open already. Come on. There's so many good quotes in this. Actually, this is one of their best written backstories in a long time. And I would love to do maybe if I get it for PC and before they do crossplay, but that's a lot of money. I want to do a Dead by Daylight story mode, play through the tomes in order, kind of like what and read and analyze the story. That's something that I would love to do on the second channel. Ooh, that would be fun. I gotta match the damn formatting. But I've done some of the stuff on my PC or my computer, and so instead we'll have to do it on I've done a bunch of the tasks, the story mode tasks on my PS4, so I would love to start over fresh. Rip the Rift, but fuck battle passes. and do like story, like playing the narrative of Dead by Daylight, because that would be really fun, because I hate the battle pass aspect of it, but so that's some freaks. Let's continue reading. Angel Smith, a scholar of film and disability, similarly notes that that Freaks presents numerous scenes in which freaks engage in routine and ordinary domestic behavior. Among them, Smith cites Freaks' celebration of the birth of the bearded lady's baby, the film's key dinner party sequence in which Cleopatra grows enraged when the freaks sing "We Accept Her, one of us is a welcoming song." Film scholars Martin Norden and Madeline Cahill, however, question Browning's intention of the film's final revenge scene, in which the freaks mutilate the able-bodied, morally cruel Cleopatra. The implications of the violence against Cleopatra are far from clear, they write. The members of a traditionally disempowering minority use their collective force to disempower a majority member, turn her into one of them, in effect leading us to wonder if they truly disempowered or empowered if she is truly disempowered or empowered in a new way. Browning's ambiguity only enhances the film's unsettling properties. Well, first of all, horror is about ambiguity. Horror is about not. Horror should not answer questions. It should not provide answers. It should only provide questions. First of all, that's my opinion. But one thing I think what I'm about to say is not quite the point that this is making, because in effect they are rendering Cleopatra disabled, and that's where the ambiguity is for Cahill and Norden. But I really hate the narrative that the idea that a marginalized group empowering themselves through revenge is somehow negative because it is violent. Because that's, and we're gonna get, I have a essay lined up that talks about how just because someone is the monster doesn't mean that they're automatically the villain. And sometimes, I mean, we root for slasher killers. We root for Jason. We root for, we don't always, boo the monster in a horror movie. We boo the antagonist, but sometimes the audience is behind the monster. The audience is behind the monster in Friday the 13th, and every slash movie except maybe Freddy Krueger, in some way. There's a thrill of feeling like you are doing something you're not allowed to when you root for the villain. In another good example of it's blurry whether it's gore or body horror is Pinhead. What's his name? What's that movie? Pinhead, not to be excused with the slur, ableist slur. Speaking of freaks, Pinhead from Hellraiser, the Hellraiser series. They are distorted because they want to be, because that represents their ultimate ambiguity of pleasure and pain. In Hellraiser, the Cenobites are arguably heroes. You root for them, and they are examples of body horror. Anyways, so that's why I think empowerment via violence is not automatically a bad thing. It's a big problem. That's why I have a big problem with Bioshock 2, for example, of they're they're rising up, so just as bad. It's basically Trump saying good people on either side or bad people, you know what I mean. That's essentially what Bioshock Infinite says in the end, but that's another game and genre. Let's talk about Freaks as a horror film. The widely considered, and yes, I am using Wikipedia. You're welcome. Thank you. I don't care. I use Wikipedia as a wormhole, as like the opening of a wormhole when it comes to research, because, you know, here's a source. Here's a source. Hideous Progeny, Disability, Eugenics, and Classic Horror Cinema. Ooh, that's a source. I should get that book. In fact, let me copy and paste that, actually. Copy. Paste, because the joys of internet research. Exactly, it is a good starting ground. Joys of internet research is you find more stuff to research. It never ends. Like, dramaturgy is an endless cycle until the play is done. And there's always more stuff to research. What else did I want to look at? For what other source did I want? I want this one, Cahill. Here we go. Where's that? Ooh. Do we have a link? Do we have a link? Also. Yeah, do I gotta... Oh, come on. Am I able to download? Is it free? Or do I gotta pay? Oh, it's from 1964. How dare I try to read this essay from Film Quarterly from 60 years ago. Oops. I'm just going to copy this. I will. I want to find, and you can like supposedly like research or reach out to authors to, like, authors will often provide copy because they don't get money from these kinds of publications. I don't like. Anyways, back to Wikipedia. Status as a horror film. Though widely considered a horror film, some critics such as John Thomas and Raymond Durgnat have noted that Freaks does not fully embody the genre. Thomas wrote in Film Quarterly that Freaks would disappoint no one but the mindless children who consume most horror films. Certainly is macabre, but the point is that Freaks is not really a horror film, though it contains some horrifying sequences. Durgnat made a similar observation, writing that, like the films of Louise Buñuel, its shock value mingles with moments that seem shallow, but by the end of the film begins to catch their mood, a calm, cold combination of guignol and nearly matter of fact. That's still horror! Grand Guignol, which I've been told I need to get into for Theater of the Great Puppet. It's a... Alright, this is just... I'm gonna paste this here. It's not part of the body horror research, but it's horror theater. Film studies scholar Joan Hawkins describes the evolution of the film's genre was how the evolution of how the film's genre was perceived. Noting that it started as a mainstream horror film that migrated into the exploitation area, also partially related to horror film until finally being incorporated as an avant-garde or art project. Also, all still, like, that doesn't make it not horror. Hawkins notes that Browning inverts the audience's expectation in demonstrating that it is the ordinary and apparently normal, the beautiful which horrify. That doesn't make it not horror. The monstrous and distorted which compel our respect, our sympathy, and ultimately our affection. That doesn't make it not horror, especially because it reveals a part of humanity about the able-bodied that is horrifying, and therefore, A, forces us to empathize with the disabled, and B, it's that inoculation effect. That's what horror is about. It's you are experiencing emotions of fear and dread and terror that you don't otherwise want to experience, and it allows you to experience those emotions safely. And that's what, if you're empathizing with the freaks, that's not what I meant to say. If you are empathizing with the quote unquote freaks, the disabled people in the film, it's still a horror film because what the people do are horrendous. Smith writes that the inclusion of freaks within the horror genre forces our reconsideration of the genre's status and challenges readings in which all horror movies are seen to use monstrous bodies to the same effects. Film theorist Eugenie Brinkema suggests that Freaks functions as a horror film not because Cleo is mutilated and Hercules is killed, all lighting and dark shadows. No, Freaks is a horror film because the gaze itself is horrific, because locating the gaze is a work in terror. So, what that basically is saying is, we're forced to confront, if you're able-bodied and you're watching it, you're forced to confront some really dark shit about yourself and your relationship with your body and your relationship with those with different bodies. What's the source? Can I please read it? So that's Freaks, and that's arguably like earliest horror film, an example of a potential example of body horror, because they didn't really have body horror back then, but it can be viewed as, because it is bodies that are not bodies that are differ from what we expect and therefore incites fear. Now, before we leave Freaks, or now that transitioning out of Freaks, I want to read this article that I read a while back when I was doing research for my upcoming, stay tuned, Marble Hornets video essay. I was specifically, I had a really good quote yesterday with my friend Alex when we were playing Monster Hunter together. I went looking for mental health and instead I found ableism. But it's looking at how the construct of ableism dwells within horror and because, I have another there's plenty of articles out there condemning horror for its treatment of the disabled. And yeah, fair enough. There's a lot of shitty, Norman Bates? What article? Oh, I think it was, what's his name? We're just going to go to YouTube and scroll through my subscriptions. I know. Justin Summerhall is his name. There's a guy that talks about Psycho, and not just Psycho, but all of its sequels, and Here's something I didn't know. Anthony Cooper, I think his name. Anthony Perkins plays Norman Bates for like 4 films. I did not know that. I just thought he did the first Psycho because I knew like vaguely that they were Psycho. James Somerton talks about this. I don't want to watch the video. I don't want to steal his work, or maybe just highlight the clips if I can remember which video it is. I don't know if it's Monsters in the Closet or if it's the new one. Let's see. I don't know if it's deep. I think it's Deep Cuts. Watch this video, James Somerton's. I'm going to post it in the chat. Go subscribe to this guy. He is doing things that what I want to be doing on YouTube, or what I tend to start doing, which is just incredible video essays, but from like a truly queer standpoint. Like he's the only person that is specifically looking at horror through a clear lens. Let's see. He also looks at what's it called? Hellraiser through a clear lens, which is just let's see. Maybe this has it. I don't want to do the whole video, but I want to like. Anyways, basically what he says is that Norman Bates almost gets.
Hannibal was locked up. Clarice tracks down the psychotic killer, rescues his final victim, and kills him in self-defense.
I don't want to steal stuff, James.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Does he have? Are there?
Silence of the Lambs is actually the first movie to be labeled a psychological thriller. It was a horror movie when it first came out.
That Canadian accent, though. I want to direct quote you. I don't want to. I ain't trying to steal it. Go watch James Somerton
for the next 18 months. Otherwise, helping men of a certain.
Deep Cuts, very good queer horror analysis. But basically, what he says is, they almost give. In Psycho 2, they almost make up for or repair or. What's the word? So Psycho 1, very much, and this is not body horror, this is just ableism and horror. And in queerphobia and horror. Psycho 1 basically throws mentally ill under the bus. If you haven't seen Psycho, Norman Bates thinks he's his mother, his dead mother, and his arousal incites a very fictional version, unrealistic version of dissociative identity disorder, cause him to swap, don an alter that is his mother, and kill women. A lot of problems with that, and it's the kind of film that. As this article villainizing bodies and minds and ableism in horror movies, you're like, yes to all this. However, it's like the most it's the simplest read you can do. It's the easiest read you can do. It's and that's the case for most ways of identifying the problematic aspects of horror. is because horror is inherently problematic. Modern horror literally was created by one of the most racist people to ever exist because of his fears. And it was his fears of the unknown that made it so effective. And that is problematic. Yeah. But it also allows us to have insights about ourselves that we don't want to confront. And that's why you can't just label horror is bad, horror is harmful, because as we saw with Freaks, it is much more ambiguous. It's often ambiguous. There's often two sides of the same coin. As my friend Allison, when I posted that question of is body horror ableism or commentary on ableism, she said depends on the context, and that's the key. And so there's a bazillion articles like this of saying horror throws XYZ people on the bus, and it does. It's not to say that it doesn't. It's not to say that horror is perfect. I mean, don't get me started on. I again, go watch James Somerton's videos about queer horror and queerness. Period. Just very good summaries, but it's ambiguous, and that's what horror is about. So, enter Melinda Hall at Stetson University. I was researching, like I said, my Marble Horns video essay, and I was looking for, again, mental health thing. That's where I found that villainizing article. And I was looking for mental health, and I found ableism, and when I was thinking about this stream, I was like, okay, let's pull that article up, because there's a lot to unpack there that, again, can... And also, let's just say, rewind, we'll get to further examples. Not all body horror is directly connected to... is meant to represent disability or the disabled. But that's like the starting framework. It's also about illness. It's also about alienation. It's also about a distortion of the sense of self, which can be used as a distortion of the sense of self. And what scares you about that is not necessarily the like, oh no, my body is different, but oh no, who am I anymore? Or who is this person that I once knew? Because they're not behaving the same way. That's like The Thing is a perfect example of this person I knew is not the person I knew anymore. So I don't know if we'll get to this entire article, but here we go. This is the quote. This is the quote. I claim that horror, despite its frequent abuse of disability, has significant potential to structure alternative encounters with and visions of disability. These alternative encounters can build inroads to political inclusion by fostering the acceptance of vulnerability and pushing for the rejection of exclusive social norms and ableism by highlighting them as horrific. This potential is evident in the work of two influential horror authors, Tim Burton and Stephen King. I'm particularly interested in those instances in which Burton and King's terrifying and uncanny fictional worlds are populated by young or childlike protagonists. And Ash, if you're still watching, brings up, going back to the Claws, Edward Scissorhands, the abandoned child monster. Hold on. The potential is evident in the work of two influential horror authors, Tim Burton and Stephen King. I'm particularly interested in those instances in which Burton and King's terrifying and uncanny fictional worlds are populated by young or childlike protagonists. Now, that could potentially be problematic because young or childlike is like people with mental disabilities are considered problematically young or childlike, but they are not. They are adults. But I don't think that the examples she used are necessarily examples of that. It's more so like strangers in a strange land kind of thing. According, thank you, Ash, and thank you for being here. This is I feel less insane when I know someone is here. Although I know I am recording, and holy shit, I've been recording. I've been going for an hour and 20, which doesn't feel like that long. Anyways, these young heroes deal with the everyday horror of the societal world and noxious costs of both forced compliance and forced isolation. They attempt to build alternative bonds that allow them to interact with others, while at the same time rejecting the violent and degrading dominant culture. Where is it? Tim Burton. Okay, here we go. Edward Scissorhands contrasts a Gothic setting inherited from Frankenstein with a candy-colored suburban setting. It plays with the border between the two when Edward uses his prosthetic hands to cut the hair of housewives around town. Oh wait, let me rewind. Here we go. According to horror theorist Noel Carroll, horror plays... Did I copy that quote? I just want to go make sure. Okay, cool. It did the thing. Okay, here we go. According to horror theorist Noel Carroll, horror plays with the line between the ordinary and the extraordinary. Anyone familiar with the work of Tim Burton will recognize this as particularly true of his creations. Here, Carroll's description of the usual tension between the two does not quite capture the uniqueness of Burton's vision. Carroll writes, in examples of horror, it would appear that the monster is an extraordinary character in an ordinary world. But for Burton, there are extraordinary monsters with ordinary feelings in extraordinary worlds, wherein the behavior of the normal members of society appears to turn inscrutable, cruel, and unjustified. Thinking this through a Kostevian lens, we are urged in Burton's stories to attend to the typically submerged work of responding to objection, in which the permeability of individual and social borders is covered over, and borders themselves receive support and justification. Here, I am thinking specifically of Edward Scissorhands, one of Tim Burton's most well-known films. Edward is an extraordinary boy facing an extraordinary world of exaggerated sameness and the underlying violence of cruelly enforced conformity. Load Google Docs. Anyways, contrasts its Gothic setting, inherited from Frankenstein, with normal. Okay, the neighborhood women. Okay, here we go. Uses his prosthetic hands to cut the hair of housewives around town. The neighborhood women attempt to put his hands to their own uses and draw him into their fold, thereby resolving his problematic difference. But the sharp hands that trim hair, create ice sculptures, and shape shrubbery soon threaten when Edward is used by one of the young men in town to pick a lock. As a result of this incident, Edward is demonized and eventually startled into a fight with the same young man who used him. Edward kills him by stabbing him in the stomach to defend a young woman he befriended. Edward is not human. He is a machine hybrid, half human, half something else, created by a scientist who left his project unfinished. Edward may even be immortal, as suggested in the film, due to his artificial origin. In the end, we see him excluded from the social, alone and howling in his Gothic castle far beyond town, where not only the weather but also the saturation of color is markedly different. The story, however, does not make the suburban world sympathetic. Instead, the audience identifies with Edward and becomes disgusted with suburban exclusion. Tim Burton is problematic, but oh boy, do I like that idea. Like that's what I want to do, I think. Why is Google Drive moving so slow? Is it because I have so many tabs open and because I'm streaming? Anyways. And then it goes into his, which is really good. I had completely forgotten about this. I've actually read this. His book, Melancholy Death of Oyster Boy and Other Stories. So, just to read a few examples. The boy with nails in his eyes put up his aluminum tree. It looked pretty strange because he couldn't really see. And so it's like, a lot of these are like joking about, you know, people with different bodies. And they're just doing normal things. And the joke is, haha, he has it's not, haha, he has a disability, but it's like, aha, his body does this. And so that's here's the reality of what it's like to have this disability. And that's where the comedy comes from, is just reality of the distortion, the ordinariness of it. And so, and here, oh, I'm going to copy and paste this because this may or may not be something that I use in the podcast. We'll read it and then we'll try and paste it into the Google Doc. I might open OneNote. I was originally just going to copy and paste this into OneNote. One day in the park, I had quite a surprise. I met a girl who had many eyes. She was really quite pretty and also quite shocking. I noticed that she had a mouth, so we ended up talking. We talked about flowers in her poetry classes and the problems she'd have if she ever wore glasses. It's great to know a girl who has so many eyes, but you get really wet when she breaks down and cries. So again, body horror. And also, like, one of my worst, like, biggest weaknesses when it comes to horror and body horror is eyeballs. The lack of them, or too many of them, eyes, fuck with me. And this poem just makes it the most normal thing. And so what does that mean? And what if, you know, someone was not born like this, but suddenly become covered in eyeballs? What were to happen? And so that's really where I end up with the ableism question. In that, yes, it can be used for bad, but largely it just, with a little bit of effort, like, and consideration, like, we don't have to think about simple distortions of the body as something, as hell.